without further ado, I'm going to introduce somebody who we've been working with for a while. We've known Ed for a couple of years. He's been instrumental in writing and helping out with the LibGit 2 project and integrating that into Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server at Microsoft, senior engineer at Microsoft. Please welcome Ed Thomson.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're excited to be here at Git Merge. I know I am, celebrating the 10th birthday of Git. I'd like to think that 10 years ago when Linus put his first commit into Git, he thought that we would all be sitting here and you would all be listening to a guy from Microsoft tell you about Git. But I'm actually not going to tell you about Git. I trust that most of the people here know enough about Git that you don't want that guy from Microsoft telling you really how it works. So instead, I'm going to tell you a little story about how we put Git into Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server. Certainly the highlight of my career at Microsoft, probably the hardest thing we've ever done, both technically and politically, legally, really in every way. And so I hope you enjoy it. Real quick introduction. Again, my name is Edward Thomson. I work on the Visual Studio team at Microsoft. If you're a Windows dev and you use Visual Studio, you like Visual Studio, then I got to be honest with you, I'm actually lying a little bit. I work on the Visual Studio Online team. You may know that better as the Team Foundation Server team. Quick show of hands, how many people use Team Foundation Server, know of Team Foundation Server? Keep your hands up if you really like Team Foundation Server. Yeah. That's kind of the typical reaction. Team Foundation Server is something that Microsoft is super happy about. No joke, super happy about it. It's one of the best-selling application lifecycle management platforms. We call it ALM. Application lifecycle management means like it's got integrated bug tracking and version control, continuous integration, build and test. All the stuff that you want in an enterprise. Microsoft's been selling it since 2003. By 2012, we were beating ClearCase, which is basically what we set out to do. We were beating Rational Jazz, which is also kind of what we set out to do. This industry analyst Gardner puts out this, they call it the Magic Quadrant report. I don't know exactly what the quadrants are, but being at the top and being at the far right is the best, and that's where we were. So we were pumped about this. The problem was people using our version control systems weren't always so pumped. In 2012, we had sort of two modes to TFS. The first one was, in version control parlance, a checkout, edit, check-in system. You had to explicitly check out a file. It was read-only until you did. Not everybody really liked this. People thought we were bozos. The reason you do this, just quick rationale. The reason you do this is so that you can support the Windows code base, which is gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes. I won't go into whether it should be gigabytes, but it is gigabytes, and we need to support that. And so scanning the file system, looking for changes, is incredibly expensive. That's why we built a system to make you check out the files explicitly. The problem is people working on a normal size code base don't want this. This is friction for them. You got to be on the server, you got to be connected to it, to a network. You can't be on a plane working, at least not easily. So in 2012, we kind of fixed this problem. We put in a new mode to TFS to work like, again, in version control parlance, an edit, merge, commit system. Files weren't read-only anymore. You could just edit a file. We would scan the file system. We'd figure out that you made these changes, and then you could check them in. Okay? So 10 years after Team Foundation Server launched, we finally had Subversion. So we were very proud of ourselves. Yeah, Subversion. The thing about TFS is people still weren't entirely happy. This is just a random sample of internet comments. And in fact, people had started calling it Team Frustration Server. We were, for the most part, happy with it at Microsoft, using it internally. Again, we have giant code bases, and for the most part, they don't scale well to things like Git, to a distributed version control system. Except that when, in 2012, I was on a little team at Microsoft I was on the cross-platform team. I was building the Unix tools to talk to Team Foundation Server. And we were like a really distributed team. I was in Chicago. One of my buddies on the team was in Raleigh, North Carolina. One of my other buddies was in Northern Ireland. And one day we're on the phone talking, and we're like, you know what's slow is talking to our version control server in Redmond. Because, of course, at Microsoft, everything's in Redmond. And my buddy Martin jokes, hey, wouldn't it be great if we were using a distributed version control system? And we laughed and laughed. Nobody's laughing. Nobody understands how hilarious it is that somebody on the TFS team would suggest that we use a distributed version control system and not use TFS. We thought it was the most ludicrous thing we'd ever heard. But at the same time, it stuck. We started thinking about this more and more. Why aren't we using a distributed version control system? And again, we run into that. We eat our own dog food at Microsoft. We couldn't use a distributed version control system unless we wrote a distributed version control system. So that's what we started thinking. Why aren't we writing a distributed version control system? This seemed like a really great idea. And again, I was on the cross-platform team at the time. So I went and talked to the TFS version control team, and I'm like, hey guys, why aren't we writing a distributed version control system? And one of the guys looks at me and he's like, well, we've got some great ideas about that. And I'm like, good. So one thing you got to know about Team Foundation Server is it's basically one big SQL stored procedure, or maybe many SQL stored procedures. All of Team Foundation Server is in SQL Server. It's all stored procedures. It's all very complex, and I don't understand a word of it. But the version control team does. And so he looked at me, and he's like, I've got some great ideas. We can put SQL Compact Edition on everybody's client. We can figure out a way to replicate to the SQL Server when they want to push. And so I kind of slowly backed out of the room. And I decided that maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. And in fact, maybe we should go back to using a distributed version control system and not writing a distributed version control system. So that's what we decided we were going to do. We were going to figure out how to use a distributed version control system and what that meant for Team Foundation Server. And of course, we thought we were going to use Mercurial because 5 years ago, the best thinking on the internet, if you Googled like distributed version control system Windows, everybody thought Mercurial was the best thing. So we thought we were going to use Mercurial, but we thought we should also do a little bit of homework before we just dove right in. So we looked at Git and pretty much said, no, that's probably not going to work for us. We couldn't ship a whole copy of a Unix-like operating environment like msysGit. All of a sudden we've got concerns about the legality of doing that. We've got concerns about whether that's a good thing for our customers, if that's what they want. We kind of want to, we don't shell out a lot in Visual Studio. Doing that for editor integration would be kind of weird. And then we looked at this other tool called Veracity from a little company called SourceGear that does version control systems in central Illinois. We were a little biased towards Veracity because most of us on the cross-plat team used to work there. So we were kind of like, well, maybe we should think about Veracity. Maybe we should think about Mercurial. Let's do a little bit more research. And the first thing we really did was to look at the popularity of distributed version control systems. And again, this was several years ago, and this is totally, these numbers are completely made up. So please don't believe that this is hard research here. But we got this old kind of data, and we're like, well, Git's more popular than Mercurial, whatever. We got some newer data, and we're like, well, Git's still more popular than Mercurial. Yeah, whatever. And we got some newer data, and we're like, ooh, Git's a lot more popular than Mercurial. And so we had a really hard decision, like, do we kind of back Mercurial, which we had been kind of doing on our open source hosting site, Codeplex. It supported Mercurial and TFS. It didn't support Git at the time. We're like, ooh, Turns out this company named GitHub was becoming a little bit popular. Maybe you've heard of them. And it kind of made a lot of sense to start following Git. And we're glad that we did, because the popularity trend continued to go up. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with or bad about Mercurial. There's no reason that, that Git's popularity should necessitate that we use it. But that is what we decided to do. At that point, we had to figure out how to make this happen. And once you start doing research into Git, one of the first things you notice is it's got this really cool like file system, object storage mechanism that is just beautiful. It's a thing of beauty once you crack open your Git repository and understand how it works. The thing that this kind of suggests to you, though, if you're if you're just naively looking at it, is that it's really easy to take another version control system and map it onto Git concepts. And so that's what we decided to do. Why don't we build this kind of transparent Git bridge proxying layer so that all of your data could still live in Team Foundation Server in TFS version control, so that people could interoperate between TFS and Git. You know, if you wanted to use Git, you could. And if I wanted to use TFS, I could on the same project. We thought this was a really brilliant idea. We went and built it. We called it the Git Bridge. It was this component to TFS. It basically just spoke the HTTP Smart Transport Protocol, and it gave you a Git repository. You could Git clone, you know, some part of your TFS repository. And we immediately regretted it. It was just terrible. I don't want to say that too loudly because I know a competitor of ours actually sells this to you and makes you pay money for it. So I don't want to be so negative, but it was a terrible idea. The good part is we were able to reuse some of the components that we wrote for it, but no, we immediately threw it away after we had built it because we couldn't even stand to use it and we knew how it worked. And instead we decided we actually had to really truly support Git. So that's what we did. We put Git support into Visual Studio. Visual Studio can, can pull, it can push. It talks to a local Git repository on disk. It's a real Git repository. It's not some fake thing, Microsoft Git. We put Git support in the Team Foundation Server. We didn't, try to map it onto TFS in some weird way. We actually host real Git repositories. Of course, they're in SQL Server because that's what we do, like I said, but never mind that. And once we decided we were going to do this, we had to convince a lot of people that this was a good idea. The first people we had to convince was our management. And it turns out my boss at the time had previously managed the TFS version control team. And his boss previously managed the version control team. And his boss previously managed the version control team. So you can imagine going into a meeting and saying, hi, I want to throw all of your version control code away and start using Git instead, went over very, very well. In fact, my boss's boss, the first thing he said to me was, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't we make Git a little portion of TFS and they can interoperate? Yeah. So that was actually a tough sell for us. It was not an impossible sell. But it was a tough sell, especially because the first thing that my management ever hears from customers is, how do I do fine-grained permissions? How do I control who can access this part of TFS? How can I make sure that I have an audit trail of who changed what? How do I, all of these things that Git doesn't easily or perhaps well support. And so immediately, many of my managers wanted to make a Microsoft Git. Because they've been hearing all these pain points from customers for 10 years. They've got 10 years of customer complaints that Git just simply can't handle. And so the idea was to handle it, to figure out how to do file locking in Git, to figure out how to do auditing in Git, to figure out how to build a Microsoft Git. The good thing about my managers is that they're all programmers, right? Microsoft promotes programmers to manage programmers and to make decisions about the programs that they manage. And so and they're all smart people, so it really didn't take very long to convince them that we couldn't do that we had to interoperate, that the power of Git was that it's Git, and that I can use the Git command line and Visual Studio or Stash or push my repositories into GitHub, and that we're all speaking the same protocols, that we're all talking to the same repositories. that there isn't a Microsoft Git. If we want to change Git, we need to change Git. We need to get on the Git mailing list. We need to send patches. We need to work with the alternate implementations of Git, like libgit2 and jgit, so that everybody is doing the same thing. So thankfully, we got the OK to just ship Git. Okay, and that's what we do. You know, instead of everything going up into TFS VC, now everything just goes into Azure for Visual Studio Online and Team Foundation Server into SQL Server in your data center. And Visual Studio talks to both TFS and to Git repositories. So we're very, very happy that that's the way it worked. But management was kind of my management, my direct management, the people in charge of TFS were sort of the easy part, because of course at Microsoft, the next group of people you have to talk to are the lawyers. And especially when you walk into a room saying, I want to start using this technology that a guy named Linus Torvalds wrote. Maybe you've heard of him? It's okay, it's under the GPL. These are things that we really expected our lawyers to have a problem with. And so we sat down with them. My lawyer in Visual Studio is in a group called the Developer Division. We build tools for developers. So I sat down with the dev-div lawyer, and we told him what we wanted to do. We want to start shipping Git. And we laid out the GPL. We laid out libgit2, which is the implementation that we actually talk to. libgit2 is under a slightly different license. It's the GPL, but it has a linking exception. So you can include it in a commercial program. You can include it in a closed source proprietary program. But you do have to, if you make changes to libgit2 itself, you have to send those changes back. So it's a slightly different license. We explained all this to him very patiently. And he just gave me the dumbest look I've ever seen. And he said, well, this is a lot of information, but I actually think this is really great because I'm tired of using GitHub to store my work, and I'd really rather use Visual Studio. No kidding, the dev-div lawyer has a bachelor's from MIT. So wasn't a tough sell for them, actually. Obviously, there were problems. We have to figure out how we can comply with the licenses that we need to comply with and do so responsibly, how to be good citizens. But our lawyers were simply amazing. That's probably the only time in my life I'll utter that statement. As soon as I buy a house or get married, all bets are off. But the dev-div lawyers at Microsoft are super amazing. And after that, of course, we had to go to senior management. And by senior management, I mean Steve Ballmer. And again, we had a conversation. I wasn't in the room. But we had a conversation with Steve Ballmer. And we told him what we wanted to do. And I don't really know how he reacted. But I think he was a little skeptical. But we told him that we really thought this was the right idea. But more importantly, this is really what developers wanted. And again, I wasn't there, but I would really like to think that that he got up and started screaming about developers. Because a lot of people give Steve Ballmer grief about a lot of things. But Steve Ballmer, this isn't a joke. He actually means this. He really cares about how developers on the Microsoft platform are able to build software. He's serious about this. This is something he's passionate about. And so when we convinced him that we weren't a bunch of idiots, that we were going to try to do the right thing here, yeah, he signed off. So Visual Studio 2012 was the first. We made a sort of V6, a download available to an extension package for 2012, and then we put it in 2013. So Visual Studio 2013 was the first version with Git support. Team Foundation Server 2013 was the first version where you were able to push a Git repository into it. And people were happy. People were, really happy about using TFS. And of course, we kept Team Foundation Version Control around because we have customers like defense contractors and the government who really do care about where their data is going and who's seeing it and how to lock it. And so we still support that, and we'll continue to support it. It's something that we use at Microsoft a lot still. But now, if you're a 3-person dev shop, you don't have to have this kind of cumbersome, complicated system where you have to set up in advance a strategy for branching and know how you're going to want to do integrations between your branches. And TFS is great for that, but if that's not what you want to do, and it's not what a lot of people want to do, you can just use Git now. I would love to take all the credit for this, like all of it. I did all the work, I wrote all the code, it was all my idea. Sadly, that's not true. We've got a great team at Microsoft. The version control team is really great. It's much bigger than it used to be, and it's not all people who know SQL stored procedures. A couple of them are here. We've got some good hackers working on libgit 2 and libgit 2 sharp, and the actual Git, sort of integration, Team Explorer in Visual Studio, and all the stuff to manage Git repositories in Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Online. But of course, I mean, it's not just Microsoft either, putting this code in. Again, we use a library called libgit 2. Libgit 2 is another implementation of Git. It's a C library. It's meant to be linked into your programs. We use libgit 2 sharp, which is a C#, a .NET wrapper around libgit 2, because we like writing in C# at Microsoft. So these two projects were super important to us. And to getting us there. The libgit 2 community has been amazing. I love working with these guys, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. It's awe-inspiring. A lot of them happen to be GitHubbers, not all of them, but there happen to be a number of GitHubbers using and writing libgit 2, and they were also super great. When we said we want to put Git support into Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Online, we kind of expected GitHub to say, well, you're on your own. But no. And in fact, they have been so nice. As soon as we started talking about this, we actually just got together with the rest of the libgit 2 contributors at their offices and talked about this stuff. So big thanks to GitHub. For all their help here. But I can't not thank the Git community, Git itself. First of all, we wouldn't be talking about this without the amazing work that they've done. Junio especially for managing it and making it what it is. The other thing to think about the Git community is that there's a lot of Git code in libgit 2. A lot of the authors of Git have been kind enough to allow libgit 2 to reuse the code with a linking exception. Obviously, we can't just pull the code out because they're under different licenses. But a lot of authors have been kind enough to relicense their work. And of course, Git for Windows. Git for Windows is a great project, severely underfunded. Sadly. So if you are a Windows user and you use Git, you're probably using Git for Windows. I haven't asked, but I'm sure they wouldn't turn down donations. So something to consider. Yeah, thank you. And of course, without Git, we all wouldn't be here today. So we've been so happy at Microsoft to be a part of this community, a small part. I wish we were a bigger part, and I hope that we will continue to invest here to spend more time working on, first of all, Git implementations, but also, Git itself, Git core, and making it better on Windows. I think that that's a really valuable thing that we could do for Windows developers, and I think that you'll see more coming from us. So that's really all I got. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for being a part of this community and making it what it is. We've been, again, so happy to be a part of it. And I hope you all celebrate the birthday. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Scott now.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks.
All right.